I'm Shahar Azani, and in the news, the relationship between Israel and diaspora Jewry. Recently, Israel's Consul General in New York, Ambassador Dani Dayan, was quoted in the media lamenting that relationship with diaspora Jewry does not interest Israelis. He warned that the Jewish people might split into two tribes. The Jewish world and Jewish civil society are ripe with organizations supporting the state of Israel. But what is happening in the other direction? To take a glimpse into that question, I am thrilled to have with us on JBS Talia Levanon. She is the CEO of the Israel Trauma Coalition. The Israel Trauma Coalition is a non-profit partnership of NGOs specializing in emergency preparedness, building resilience, and trauma care. In 2019, the Israel Trauma Coalition, ITC, was officially granted special consultative status to the United Nations Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, the highest status a non-governmental organizations can achieve at the global level. The ITC is also very involved on the international stage. Israel's experience preparing for and coping with crisis and terror makes Israeli trauma experts amongst the most knowledgeable on the global map. Teams of ITC experts share their knowledge and help local professionals establish recovery and rehabilitation programs in response to both man-made and natural disasters. The ITC trains local care providers, leaving behind a more robust civilian resilience network. Truly one of the major Israeli miracles of recent times. Talia, she is the ITC's CEO. She served as an officer in the IDF in 1973 during the Yom Kippur War, working with bereaved families and wounded soldiers. Since 2001, she has directed the Israel Trauma Coalition, this collaborative network of over 40, you heard me correctly, over 40 organizations committed to a proactive role in policymaking and the provision of a systematic continuum of trauma-related care and preparedness. She has over 30 years of experience in the field of trauma care and bereavement and represents Israel internationally on the issue, frequently as a keynote speaker. Tali was born in Switzerland. She was raised in Nigeria. She and her husband Erez live in Jerusalem and take great joy in their 4 daughters and 6 grandchildren. Tali, it's a pleasure to have you with us today, and welcome to JBS.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Shahar, and thank you for having me.
Let's start to talk about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Born in Switzerland and raised in Nigeria, how does that work?
Well, it worked easily. I was just a child. My father was studying in Switzerland, where I was born. And then through Israel, he went to work in Africa, in Nigeria, where I spent most of my childhood. I came to Israel on my own when I was 14.
Wow. And we also learned that you all served in the IDF during the Yom Kippur War in a similar capacity to what you do today. How did that come about? Was it by chance?
There is never a chance. I was serving as an officer in the army with a unit of a battling information unit. And the war started and we began having casualties. And like it happens in life, I became, somebody had to do it, so I became a casualty officer for this unit.
Wow, that's amazing. It's amazing how the IDF, or how we find our place in life. Maybe tell us a little bit about the Israel Trauma Coalition. Over 40 organizations under one umbrella. How did it come to be? It's rather unusual for so many and so much to be mashed together and be such a success as the ITC is.
It is unusual and it is extremely challenging. It began in 2001 at the beginning of the second Intifada. When you look back, you will see that very few federations were focused then on psychosocial aspects. Many were helping Israel in many ways, but not in the psychosocial aspects. And the new UJA Federation of New York decided to bring together 7 organizations to create a partnership so that they will be able to what we later coined as a continuum of care. And we began with 7 organizations and we grew and grew because the needs are growing and there is a need to bring in more NGOs who are working around the field of preparedness and response.
Wow, and in 2001 was also very challenging in Israel with a second intifada.
It was very challenging in Israel, and I will tell you, I will share, you're talking about a shared reality in the world. When the Israel Trauma Coalition began, mission came from New York, and they were here on September 11, and we, not I, but other people were with this mission at the same time. And I think this is a very strong bonding of understanding that we are all exposed to a lot of stress, and we need to work together.
Talk about exposure to stress and working together. We have to discuss the elephant in the room, or shall we say the tiny elephant in the room. What's happening with the coronavirus? What kind of activities has the ITC taken in Israel and outside of Israel to fight this from the trauma perspective and beyond? Maybe you can share that.
The coronavirus is not a tiny elephant. It is a life changer, and it brings together a lot of our thoughts over the years, a lot of our insights over the years. ITC in Israel is working with hospitals, with the Ministry of Health, with teams that are providing care for the elderly and for people who are sick, for people who are in facilities outside of their homes, with social workers who became really the first responders in many ways, with the minorities in Israel, the Bedouin community, and so on. And I can go on to say what it is we are doing, but I think what is very important is what we have learned about what we did know and what we did not know, and how prepared we were, and what it is we need to put in place in order to be more prepared. But most of all, I think what we all learned from the coronavirus crisis is that we have a choice. And I think we all have a choice to see what it is that we want to do, how it is that we can learn even from our mistakes in order to move forward in a better way. And this is something that I think we all experience all over the world. And we shared it with our colleagues in the States and in other countries in the world.
Before sharing it internationally, maybe tell me a little bit about the work you do in Israel. You mentioned the Bedouin community. Can you just coin it for us to tell us exactly how do you work? What is it when you say that you work with communities? What do you do?
So we have a resilience center in the Bedouin community, which is very unique actually. And what we did is as we always do, we begin by doing a mapping of the people that we work with, in this case, the local councils in the Bedouin community and the local welfare services in the Bedouin community, to see what their needs are. We were all concerned that the Bedouin community, being such a close community, will be very affected by the coronavirus. And surprisingly, when we look back, they weren't so affected, but we were trying to bring forth materials and understanding, and we had a lot of materials prepared for the Bedouin parents, for the Bedouin social workers in Arabic. We had short movies for parents to try and share how it is that you cope with all your children at home, and it's a time of great concern for you as a parent and for the children to be together without going out, without knowing what's going to happen. And so all our work is culturally adapted, and we needed to do that also for the Bedouin community.
Wow. So for me, as an ordinary Israeli living in Israel, if I want tools how to cope mentally and emotionally with the situation, I'm able to access the ITC's resources and watch those videos and read those booklets?
You are, but our over the years, I believe our main concern in times of routine is not to always reach out to the end user, but to work with the teams so that the community will have their own resources, because we believe that the strong community is a community where they are trained and prepared, and they will be the one to access materials and knowledge to the citizens. Because
so training of trainers.
Yeah, living in a kibbutz is very different than living in Tel Aviv, and so maybe they will have different ways of coping, and they need to create their own ways.
Let's talk about international collaboration in the age of coronavirus. I'm sure you had a lot of that coming your way.
So everybody was home. My colleagues from Israel, my colleagues from around the world, we shared a lot of materials professionally. It was quite touching actually to receive materials about children from Czechoslovakia or from Greece or from Germany, and of course from the States. We had video conferences to share knowledge and also to think together about what the best ways to reach out, for example, again, to families. The challenges of hospital teams are shared. The issue of grief and bereavement in the hospitals, with families being away from the patient, was an issue that we were all struggling with in order to help the teams and the families in the communities, and also the bereavement process, which is different, of course, in different cultures, but we were all struggling with helping the bereaved families cope with that. And so a lot of shared knowledge, both materials and discussions over video conferences, and were shared, and it was very important. And of course, we had some conferences also with lay people to share our insights and to give some guidelines. And we had it, I think, almost 3 times a week in different communities around North America.
And your materials, as far as translating them to different languages, did you get to do that around this time?
Of course. We had materials in English, in Arabic, Amharic, Spanish, Italian. We even made a short movie in Italian for the families in North Italy who were under a lot of stress. French, Arabic, I said, many languages, yes.
Amazing. And how did, when you do this work internationally and interact with various entities and organizations, many of them civil society organizations, do you feel that your Israeli identity, does it interfere? Does the politics interfere with anything? Or how does that feel? Do you get any reactions, positive, negative, irrelevant?
Over the years, we've worked in many places, Jordan, Asia. It has never interfered. We're a people's organization. We touch people, they touch us. We come to work with them in times of crisis. They need somebody who gives a message of support and of togetherness, and it has never been an issue.
Do you feel there is a specific, or there is a sense of respect towards you because you come from Israel, with everything that entails, the traumas, the wars, the attacks, the kind of experience that you have hands-on? That's very extreme compared to other countries.
I sense a lot of respect and gratitude. We create friendships, we create long-term relationships with professionals and with lay people. We come at the worst time, and people who work with people in crisis know that at the worst time, you create a very strong bond, and we do. And I'm very grateful for that opportunity, because it is also our opportunity to give back, because we are many times in Israel are at the receiving end of many kinds of support. And so I understand fully when you feel completely alone, and even if it's for a few minutes, but you think, well, how am I going to cope? What is it that I'm going to do? Somebody reaches out to you and says, you know what to do, and we will just help you, with a little bridge. Then we feel that people are grateful. We feel a lot of gratitude for our work.
That's amazing. And speaking about the worst and coming in the worst of times, let's talk a little bit about the UN. Many of our viewers and many people know the connection between Israel and Israeli entities with the UN to be mainly connected with the Security Council or Human Rights Council, but your experience is a little bit different. Maybe you can share that with our viewers.
As I said, I'm a people's person, and so any relationship that helps people makes me feel very good about it. And so my experience with the UN, even before last year, before we received this special status, we worked years ago. There was a kidnapping of 200 kids in the school in Beslan, and we worked then with the UN. The UN approached us to provide care to the families, but more so to the providers. And we worked then with the UN. We also worked with the UN in Chechnya, because there was a very high number of psychologists who were burnt out. Again, the UN turned to us, and we were invited to the UN a few years ago. There was a week's workshop about victims of terror. And we were part of a small group. There were 7 experts from the world who came to speak about their experiences, and we shared experiences, and there were victims who were witnessing it was a very strong experience for me personally and, of course, professionally.
Wow. I'd like to focus for a minute and ask you about the Jewish world and your work in that sphere. How has that been? And maybe talk a little bit about one or two events that really left a mark.
So our work with the Jewish world, of course, is one of the most important things that we do wherever we are. I think the response will be in the two stories I will share. Me and my teams have been in many places all around the world, and I think the two places that I will forever remember are the shooting in Toulouse and the shooting in Pittsburgh that were targeted because they were Jewish. And I've worked for years with bereaved families and communities and people in crisis, but coming into a community that was targeted because it was Jewish, it's a different experience. And for me, a very strong experience to be able to communicate on a very personal and quick level. I think something is much quicker in connecting to the Jewish communities than when you come to a different community. You need to get your bearing and understand the community that you're coming to. In these two cases, the connection was very strong, the pain was very strong, and I think we were all feeling also, you always take your personal issues, and I think for all of us who work there was also this feeling of here we go again.
Wow.
Difficult.
Wow, Tali, the work that you do is utterly amazing. It's incredible that, people speak about Israel in slogan terms, startup nation, the very best, a ray of light, but just to be able to translate this into the nickels and dimes of what it really is, this amazing ray of hope that you give and instill in people's hearts, and the ability to take and transform Israeli knowledge, that's really a human knowledge, into the global language, is what people-to-people diplomacy is all about. I want to ask you this in conclusion of our short conversation. So what's next? You've brought dozens of organizations together, and iron fist in a silk glove, which is an expression I love, and you're able to share it globally. What's your vision? What's your hope for the future?
My hope is that I will have no more work, but my vision is that we have a lot of work. And again, if you're talking about the corona crisis, I think the corona crisis made us all understand that there is a lot of work we can do together, that it will shorten a learning process, that it will bring a lot of insights from different countries, but the same generic attitude. And I think we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, not to speak that the coronavirus, we have no uncertainty whether it's behind us or before us. And so I think we really, it is almost an oxymoron that in this period of physical distancing, we came so close together to working together, and it grounded us in a very important way.
Wow. That's incredible, Talia. I want to thank you very much for joining us from Jerusalem, and I wish you all the best of health, and keep up with your work. And I hope none of us meets you professionally and all of us meets you socially. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laila Tov. Thank you.
And from Jerusalem to El Paso, Texas, I'm joined now by my good friend, Robert French. Robert is the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Greater El Paso, Texas. Robert was born in London, England. Raised modern Orthodox, he spent nearly 20 years working in progressive Judaism at Stephen S. Wise Temple in LA, where he began as an educator and then created and ran many successful programs and enterprises. Recruited to New York as the Executive Director of Temple Israel of the City of New York, Robert spent over a decade helping to reshape and reinvigorate the community, building infrastructure and programming. Later, he served on the board and executive committee of the National Association for Temple Administration and was invited to serve on the Jewish Federation of New York City's Synergy Council. He is an ardent supporter of Israel. Robert launched and co-chaired Stand With Us's Northeast region and stood at the head of the board from 2009 to 2018. He was also honored at its first annual gala dinner. Robert currently serves on the board of Nirim USA. He's passionate about Jewish peoplehood in Israel, which brings him to us on JBS So, Robert, how are you, and how are you doing during these troubling times? Are you open already in El Paso, Texas?
Thank you very much, Shahar. So are we open? So the state of Texas is beginning to open up. El Paso has some exemption orders because we still have some rising cases in terms of the coronavirus and in terms of deaths. So slowly but surely, things are opening up, but we have a lot of exemptions here in El Paso, Texas. Personally, it's been a challenge for me, but a exciting challenge in terms of my role as executive director of the Jewish Federation. We've done a lot of great community work together with our partner agencies, doing a lot of great stuff for our community, bringing it together, working hard to make our community find a sense of comfort and relief and cohesiveness in these challenging times. And I think made some good inroads there.
You, as we learned about you from the bio, you are an ardent supporter of Israel, and as a Jewish professional for so many years, you've done so much to connect between Israel and diaspora Jewry. The interesting reach here is your connection with the Israel Trauma Coalition. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we're no stranger to tragedy here. Last August 3rd, we were shocked to our core by the senseless shooting of the Walmart, when 22 innocent people were killed and 26 people were injured by some senseless moron who massacred people senselessly in the Walmart. Obviously, as a Jewish community, we responded with a sense of shock and awe, and together with the Jewish Federations of North America and the Israel Trauma Coalition, we dialogued about how we could help the city. And with phone conversations together, we reached out to the mayor of El Paso, DeMarco, and offered assistance. Unfortunately, as we know, Israel is no stranger to terrorism, and they have a lot of experience in dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma based on terrorism. The city.
So here you are. So let me ask you, you're standing as the head of the federation. This happens, and we know Israel's expertise in the field, and you find this way to connect Israel and El Paso, even though, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the Jewish community severely impacted by the Walmart attack or not really?
Absolutely. We were not directly impacted, but everything that happens in a city impacts us as a community. And of course, as part of our federation, our Jewish Community Relations Council, we are concerned with everything that happens in El Paso, whether it affects us directly or not. And as part of the greater community here, it impacted us. We wanted to play our part. So when we reached out to the city, we offered the support of what we would be able to do for the community. And we knew it wasn't their immediate concern to deal with that. They had a lot more immediate, until everybody, unfortunately, I hate to be so graphic, until the bodies were buried, they were not going to be able to deal with this. But they came back to us a couple of months later and said, absolutely, we want the help. We would like to have the help. So I began to reach out to the ITC, who were very responsive and very helpful.
Were you speaking with Tali, with whom we spoke before?
Talia Levanon is absolutely fantastic. And Max, who works alongside her, the most incredible people. And we began to create Zoom calls, unbelievably, between Israel and El Paso with Jorge Rodriguez, the Office of Emergency Management here, and myself. And Tali was always amenable and agreeable, and Max too, no matter what time of day or night. They worked with us. We're 9 hours behind, and we worked on a plan, and they listened to the needs of El Paso and what they needed to do in terms of healing. And they put together a plan that would work for El Paso in terms of helping El Paso heal from the awful August 3rd tragedy.
Wow. What was the general, when you came to the city and offered the Israel Trauma Coalition's assistance, was there any politics wrapped into it? Did you get any response that was a distraction from the crisis, focusing on Israel politically, or was it merely professional? Did people understand the value of Israel in such times of crisis?
Absolutely understood the value of Israel in times of crisis. There was no politicization at all of the issue. They absolutely realized the offer of help and the expertise that Israel brought to the table. There wasn't even a question or a doubt.
And beyond the reality of Zoom, when did the ITC actually arrive in El Paso?
So once we worked out the schedule and who the invitees were going to be, it was mutually agreed that it would be in February. So just a few months ago, they came the first week of February 2020. And it didn't matter because, obviously the wounds and the scars of the shooting, they don't go away just 6 months after the shooting. These are indelible scars that affect people for a long time to come. So, they drew up a list of who the invitees were, which were going to be clinicians, faith leaders, and first responders. who were impacted and or dealing with the aftermath of the shooting, and they invited them. And they drew up a beautiful agenda which lasted the whole week. And the attendees were invited to share personal experiences. They dealt with emotional first aid, how to cope, and resilience, and strategies of self-care, really to help us heal and to help others heal, and to develop leadership in crisis, not only for today, in terms of what they were dealing with, but giving the tools for dealing with, God forbid, any future crisis that might arise.
Oh, what an amazing manifestation of value when you're able to use this people-to-people diplomacy and take advantage of Israel's abilities for the benefit of the entire community. I think it showcases to many of our viewers what could be done as a Jewish community in Israel in times of crisis, not only in our own relationship, but beyond. Robert, what are you hoping to do next when it comes to Israel and the community, or in general? What's your vision for your role in the future moving forward?
So as you said, I'm an ardent supporter of the state of Israel. I believe passionately in her and the diaspora-Israel relationship. You know, it saddens me when I read some of the articles that talk about the decline, and even with the coronavirus, about how the American Jewry in particular, obviously where I'm living, are so distracted now in terms of resources, both financial and physical right now too. But I think here's an opportunity to strengthen it even more. Even now, actually, a few weeks ago, I reached out to Talia Levanon, with who I now have a relationship, and said, here's another opportunity to connect. And I said, you know, we have teens under lockdown here. We have teens under lockdown in Israel. Let's connect them. Let's get them in a room together, a Zoom room, and say, you know, we created a program called Teens Talk to share experiences under lockdown, to create relationships between 11th graders and talk about what it means to be under lockdown. 2 workshops like that, and then have the teens come up with their own topics. Again, creating relationships. I know it's only a small thing, but ongoing relationships, opportunities to collaborate. Again, the ITC stepped up to the plate immediately with, yes, let's do it. No hesitation in terms of partnering, et cetera, et cetera. And again, helping teens to de-stress and to unload about what their experience is. Because of course, everybody like us felt the pressure of being under lockdown. This relationship is key to Israel. It's key to the diaspora Jewry, and it's so important to keep doing. And I will do everything I can, and I know ITC does too, to strengthen that relationship.
That's incredible, Robert. I want to thank you for joining us. And that was a great conversation between you and Tali to understand that the relationship between Israel and the diaspora is not only a one-sided relationship, and there is so much that could be done together. It's always inspirational to see a beating heart of a nation. And today we did, between Robert and Tali, between El Paso and Jerusalem, and all of us as one big family, a manifestation of value in the Jewish world and the world in general that we all have in the state of Israel. So I would like to thank our guests on this show, and to all of you I say, stay safe and stay healthy. I would like to thank our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's managing director, Dara Golub, our technical manager, Michael Paley, transmission manager, John McDevitt, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. For JBS, I'm Shahar Azani, and until next time, see you soon, and lehitraot.